So good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's Fireside Chat with the Mayor of Columbia, South Carolina, Daniel Rickenmann. I'm Andy Winkler, the Director of BPC's Housing and Infrastructure Project. I help in leading the work of our J. Ronald Terwilliger Center for Housing Policy. And we're so thrilled to have Mayor Rickenmann join us for the fifth conversation in our Housing Leader Speaker Series, which we launched last year to spotlight leaders in and out of government and across the political spectrum who recognize the critical importance of affordable housing and know that it's one of the most powerful tools we have to drive economic prosperity. I'm particularly excited about the conversation today because it's city governments that often have the most policy levers at their disposal to increase the supply of homes and improve housing affordability overall. So just a little background on Mayor Rickenmann before we dive right in. He's the son of Swiss immigrants who came to the U.S. in the 60s and raised him in Spartanburg, South Carolina. He attended the University of South Carolina and fell in love with the state's capital and never left it. He went on to open businesses in the city, including a successful restaurant and eventually a renewable energy company. He's also served 2 stints on Columbia's City Council, both as an at-large member and representing the city's 4th district before he was elected mayor in 2021. So Mayor, thank you so much for being with us today. Just one other quick announcement before we get started. To those of you who are watching on YouTube, feel free to drop any questions you have for the mayor in the chat at any time during our conversation. We'll be monitoring these and save some time at the end for the questions. You can also tweet questions to @BPC_bipartisan or using hashtag BPC Live. So Mayor, before we talk about your work and talk about housing, I'd love to start by talking a little bit about you. I think you have a particularly compelling kind of American dream personal story. Your parents immigrated to the U.S. You were raised by a single mother after your dad passed away when you were only 8 years old. You worked hard to go to college. You opened businesses. You started a family, and then you sought to give back by getting involved in local government, which is what we hope everyone is able to achieve in this country. So can you tell us more about you and about how these experiences have influenced how you view policy, how you view politics, and ultimately led you to run for mayor?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me today. Very excited to be here and participate in the conversation. American Dream is really a true story, and I think it's incredible. And I think so many people come here to have an opportunity that they can't have somewhere else. But it really drives back to the principles. I had a severe learning disability. Not only did I not speak English until kindergarten, as you can tell from my accent. But I lived in an immigrant neighborhood. I mean, a lot of our friends and so were from Europe. My parents spoke, 4 languages. They came here to pursue a career. But when my father died, I had developed a severe learning disability that at that point, just public school system was not capable of handling, and I had to find a school to help me with that. But the real principles my mother dropped me off and she gave me 4 things to focus on and these pieces of advice. And I pretty much everything I do drives around that, which is the first one, you got to work hard every day. And the second one is any challenges or hurdles that are there are just simply opportunities. It's how you look at them. The third is it's okay to fail. People don't judge people on failure. They judge on recovery. So it's okay to try it. It's what you learn from that mistake is what people look at. And then lastly, you got to support and give back to the community that has supported you. And for me, that's why I ended up staying in South Carolina and really in Columbia, to be quite frank. Because when I left the University of South Carolina, and I went there because at that point it was one of the few schools that had a disabled student services for folks like me with learning challenges. But what I saw when I graduated is friends started to stay here and take jobs. People were opening businesses, and I saw an opportunity because what we saw, this community supported small businesses. The government made it easy for you to open up. I was 25 years old, or 24. and opened up my first restaurant with a handful of credit cards and a hope, a dream, and a prayer. But people supported it, and we grew from that. We grew to several restaurants, and we ended up franchising some different concepts and bringing them to our community. And after about 20 years, I decided to get in the renewable business because I saw an opportunity with all the food waste and the waste products of doing something different that could improve our community and solve a problem. But for me, politics has always been in the heart. My mother, as soon as I was 18, made sure I was registered and voting. She said, not everybody has this opportunity. You need to make sure that you do it. But she also grew up in a community where women didn't get to vote until, 50 years ago in Switzerland. And after they voted, people vote for everything. I mean, everything that happens in Switzerland is voted on. And so it's important to be part of it and not being at the sidelines complaining and not doing anything but being engaged. And so I think those guiding principles is why I'm here today.
Thanks so much for that. Yeah, I mean, I think it gives you sort of a unique perspective as mayor, having tried to start a business and lead a business in your community, having started a family and had to find housing, all of the things that you've described. So thank you for sharing that. Just to turning to housing, to the topic at hand, Columbia, like so many places in the United States, has had really significant price growth over the last couple of years. According to data that we pulled from Zillow, home values in Columbia are up about 10% since last year, about 30% from 2 years ago. Rents, pretty similar, have jumped 8% since last year, 22% from 2 years ago. So my question is sort of how concerned are you about housing affordability in your city, and what have you been hearing from residents?
I would say I'm concerned. We're concerned, just like every other community. There is a high housing crisis. The cost of materials, delivery, obviously interest rates on getting people into home ownership. Unfortunately, here in Columbia, we have another added layer. We have a tax structure that penalizes the renter. Basically, anything that's not owner occupied pays a 6%, which is 30% more than the homeowner, and that really has a big effect. It's so increasing to try to get people engaged to our community and involved in that housing question. But the affordability, the attainability. I mean, we need roughly 16,000 units of housing here in our community over the next decade. I mean, right now, today, there are 5,000 people on a waiting list for housing vouchers. And the challenges become not only cost, taxes, delivery, but we went through a period of time where we zoned everything for single family homes. And today we need smaller footprints. We need higher density. We went away from the days of quadruplexes and duplexes and townhomes and pushed people into single family homes, which also created more cost, more maintenance. And so we have to have a balance of that, but we need to also protect our workforce. That is a real key component. And so battling between the growth that we're seeing, the disappearance of population. We had a dip in growth of about 8% over the last decade. And a lot of that had to do with housing. Just need new housing stock, older neighborhoods that needed more investment, people looking for bigger houses. And now we're seeing the reverse. We see a large need, especially in three categories. Baby boomers who are downsizing, who want to stay in the neighborhood where their support system is where they've grown up, where their grocery store is, their barber, beauty salon. But we're also seeing single mothers with no kids at home. Creates a whole nother category that a lot of people don't talk about, but a very large category, especially in our community. And then, of course, millennials who really want as little space as possible and want the flexibility to come and go as they want, to travel, and others, and not so much concerned about home ownership. So we're battling it from different fronts. But then we have the housing piece to it, where we're getting bigger housing developments that can provide scale and mixed use, market rate all the way to subsidized housing. But the problem there is there's too much gap. There's a 4% and 6% in tax credits, 9% in tax credits, new construction and reconstruction. But there's still gaps, and cities and counties can't afford to fill those gaps. I mean, if I had an extra $10 million right now, it could be gone tomorrow just to fill gaps on 3 projects that we have that could add a lot of housing.
Great, that's super helpful. And I think we were chatting a little bit before this, and you mentioned that's what you've been hearing from other mayors across the country when you convene. Affordable housing, some of the challenges you've had in developing, all sort of top of mind for mayors across the country. I'm sort of curious. Local policies that are intended to boost housing production. You mentioned single-family only zoning. That's something that's come up in a lot of cities. Addressing issues like that can be relatively divisive and not necessarily in a political sense or falling across direct political lines. I'm curious what your top priorities are that the city can actually achieve on your housing agenda, and how they've been kind of received or perceived by residents. How you're working to build support for some of those policies.
Well, and I think, like everything, you always have the NIMBY folks and other folks who don't want difference, but we really got to have a more variety of zoning. So we're starting to look, but we're starting with ourselves first. So the city we have almost 53 residential lots that for 20 years we haven't done anything with, and we now have those out, building single family, mixed use, bringing back into some of our challenged neighborhoods, but other areas too, but also cataloging all the property that we own and say, all right, can we use this as leverage to, if we give the land, if we put in the infrastructure, the water and sewer, and bring the right development team to build up, to make sure that, we're split up in 4 districts. At 4 districts, everywhere we have opportunities for somebody to live. It doesn't matter about your income level, but there's opportunities there. And taking these lots and using that as our jumping start, but also looking at some of our commercial properties. I mean, we need senior housing. Is there opportunity that the city has property that can't be used, that we could use that as a gap filler for some of these developers who could come in and do some senior housing projects that are levelized from an income standpoint and a rent standpoint? How do we take advantage of the state property? We're in a city where we have 6 colleges and universities, a military base, state government, and lots of nonprofits. So there's opportunities there for us to say, well, what are you not using that we could use as a way to plug the hole, the gap that we see in affordable housing, and being creative about it? We also have to look, we haven't gone vertical. Over 20 years, we've capped buildings in our downtown, and we have to stop that. We need vertical growth. The more that we can do that, the more opportunities that we can see, like other communities, to provide different opportunities for market rate on down, where we have these mixed use, which is what you really want today. You don't want anybody to know what the other person is paying, and you want to make sure that we have a diverse community in all aspects, and that's the only way we'll positive grow. The other thing is working with small developers, if there's odd shaped properties, or, working with them to do zoning where they can do, multiple houses on a site, or, as we mentioned before, duplexes and quadruplexes. I mean, there's just such a need that we have to be creative, and we've got to get a little bit away from the protectiveness. I know that affordable housing has a bad name to most people, but that's why we try to talk about attainable. We want attainable, but we also have to make sure that we're building smaller units and everywhere places so that people have the ability to grow and have an opportunity to have a better life. We shut down a public housing project about 3 years ago. There were residents in there for 40 years. To me, the system has failed. It was never designed for somebody to live in a public housing, subsidized housing for 40 years. We've got to help people get into better situations, and we got to be creative. And so everything is on the table, as we like to say.
Great. And you actually kind of already preempted two questions that we had from the audience, but I might revisit them real quick
Yeah.
since you brought it up. One, somebody asked, as a mayor of sort of the bluer parts of a pretty red state, can you talk about just kind of the dynamics of YIMBY type measures, like addressing single family only zoning in the context of your city and your state? Particularly recognizing we have a kind of a national audience here who may not be as familiar with some of the dynamics.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us here locally, I mean, the reality is that we have to just stand up and make some decisions that are good for the community. And I know it goes there. There's the NIMBYs, the YIMBYs, the all types, but we also, for years we prohibited that flexibility, and we need some flexibility. You can do it without taking away the character to a neighborhood. You can do it by working together to create some higher density. I'd rather split a lot and have two families move in there than have a big lot sit there and become dilapidated, or prevent another family from having an opportunity to be in the right school district, to be in the right neighborhood, to give them a chance to grow and move forward. I mean, I think that one of the things that we continue to do here is try to be as open as possible and looking at different opportunities. And we're doing something creative. So there's a technology that we're using that we're actually going to pilot in the next month that actually attaches to our garbage trucks, which is the only vehicle that hits every neighborhood, that actually will film, so we can identify where there's still empty lots, where there's dilapidated properties and others, that we can start working either through weatherization programs and other stuff to build those houses back up and bring them in queue, but also identify areas that we can go find out the owner. What is it going to take for us to incentivize you to build something there that benefits the need that we have in the housing market? And, there are pockets all over our city. And by addressing them one by one, we can start building up the capacity to handle the need that we have, because it can't be all, apartment complexes. It can't be all duplexes, and it can't be all single family homes. It is really a variety, and addressing those from a cost structure. And that's where we want to leverage what we have. But also, is there a way for us to work with somebody who has an idea? Maybe we can put the infrastructure in. How do we go to the infrastructure and say, all right, we'll put in the water and sewer? That's a cost that could be put towards somebody's equity or a builder's gap filling. Is there things that we can do with stormwater? Is there a benefit that if we do the detention pond on a bigger build out on larger piece with 10, 12 homes, that not only benefits the stormwater system, but helps them with a cost that they don't have, that's a win-win for the community? We get the housing and the stormwater. So just being creative, thinking outside the box.
Great. So there was one other question sort of related to that, which is, somebody asked if you could talk about what funding opportunities there are for, maybe it's through the city or otherwise, for smaller and nonprofit housing developers. You mentioned, you are identifying vacant land. You're trying to bring in developers and businesses and housing production. But what are those resources out there for people to get involved in?
Well, our community development office has a cadre of projects that are. We even have home loan programs that we have with the city. We leverage also federal dollars. We have weatherization money. We have other funding sources to help with development. Just like we talked about the infrastructure, there's a lot of things. And so part of it is just making sure people are touching base, not only with our office, but with our community development, and leveraging those dollars, but also being creative. One of the things that we're looking at right now is offering tax credits to people who are building attainable housing options, so that they could recover some of that to help lower that tax until we can get the modernization down. Because that would help somebody tremendously. Because if you could cut right now, the average renter pays 3.5 months of their rent goes to property tax. So if we could reduce that down to only 1 month's worth of rent collected, think about what that owner could do with that property. Think about what the rent rate would be. And so it becomes, but the real push, really, to be quite honest, for us to achieve is if we can do the modernization of our tax structure, it creates more competition. That means we're getting better quality apartments, more competition, rates become lower, and you get a balancing act. Right now, we don't have a whole lot of new construction and a lot of competitiveness because people aren't coming to the market unless they can get a tax break. And we don't have something at the smaller level. It's usually, 20 or 30 million is the threshold. We really need to have something smaller so that we can encourage that in-town growth.
So switching gears just slightly, here at BBC and the Terwilliger Center, we're very focused on federal policy. We put forward sort of our view of what a comprehensive and bipartisan housing affordability plan would look like. Very modestly called it the American Housing Act, and it kind of seeks to do three things. One is, increase the supply of housing that we have, preserve the existing affordable housing stock, and provide some demand side supports for families whose housing costs just exceed their income. Despite kind of the debate over the debt limit and spending here in Washington, we're still really optimistic that there's momentum, interest in doing something around housing, recognizing the severity of the challenge that we have, and doing something in a bipartisan way this Congress. And I mentioned just before this, even the junior senator from South Carolina, Tim Scott, has put forward a pretty comprehensive plan on housing affordability. So I'm curious from your perspective, what federal policies would be helpful. What has proven valuable, both federal and state resources in helping address the city's housing needs, and how could Congress and state officials do a better job from a policy perspective in helping you achieve your goals for the city?
A couple quick things that we could do immediately is, 28% of all housing costs are regulatory. So re-examining those regulatory, requirements, and how that's affecting the cost, and I think that's a quick and easy thing that the federal and state level should be working together on, is how do we address that to drive the cost down. I think tax credits, really specifically focused on smaller developments. Everything's always big developments, but those tax credits where we could get more individuals, people who are building a second home for rental, but it could make it affordable, and it helps them create, future wealth. And I think the other thing that is getting more people into home ownership. We're in a community right now where our home ownership is, only 47%. And part of that is that people who are unfortunately in a situation where they get subsidized housing, and others, they get cut out the minute that they make that transition. They get a better job and they start making it, they're completely cut off from their subsidies. Where what we really need to be focused on is figuring out how we create a 180-day kind of weaning, so that people that they're not completely taken away right off the bat.
We actually had two more questions in the chat that are sort of related. One was about when you want to rehab, whether it's public housing or other HUD assisted housing, rehab the units, it does displace families. So on the one hand, what supports are there to help people find housing when they're displaced and you're trying to renovate and rehab older facilities? The other question was about, have you solicited any feedback from tenants in some of these units to figure out what really does affect how they approach homeownership, or what's keeping them from that next opportunity up the ladder?
Yeah, I think starting with the first question, one of the challenges we have is that in a larger public housing where they've displaced families, there was an opportunity to address it differently, and it wasn't done. We're dealing right now with a 300 unit affordable housing complex that's not up to par. We actually had to vacate it for 2 weeks because they didn't have heat and water during Christmas, during the coldest period that we've had in a decade here. My problem is HUD there, to be quite frank, because they haven't inspected those units in 3 years, and then they come and do a re-inspection, and they only inspect 7 units, and I still got people with issues. We have fined them, and we're fighting with HUD and the ownership to improve the quality of those units. I'm not interested. You could instantly go in there and shut the whole place down. But what happens when you displace those families, you're turning around, you're taking their support structure away. This kid's school gets disrupted. The parents who are working have issues. And so you just create 15 other problems instead of solving. But what we ought to do is they have vacant units and start renovating those and bringing them up to par, requiring these guys who are getting 86% of all their funding from HUD to keep the standards. There shouldn't be mold. There shouldn't be gas leaks. There shouldn't be roof leaks. Making sure they have maintenance reserves. In a unit like this, these folks are collecting $300,000 a month. So it's not a money issue. It's a management issue, but there's no mechanism by the local folks other than continuing to fine them. And then HUD really needs to step up and help us fight these type of issues, because we could make projects start being rehabbed without having to relocate, because that's happened twice here, and those families aren't coming back, and they were displaced, and it created more problems than it ever solved, and it really put people back. It didn't help them advance. So, we've got to work closer with HUD with better solutions on how we address this in the future. The second part is, I've talked to lots of folks, and the biggest hurdle, people have the fear of being cut off from their benefits, because when they make that step, they get completely cut off. They need some grace period to get in, because right now I could put somebody in a single family home or a duplex or a townhome cheaper with a house payment, with a PMI, paying for insurance and property tax cheaper than what they're paying in rent, for them to have an opportunity to create generational wealth. And so we're trying to do that one step at a time, working with the housing authority that we have in Columbia. They have they call it the homeownership college, and they got people graduating. Met with a lady this morning. She's ready to go. As soon as we can get some of these houses, the city she's one of the first qualified. We're partnering with banks to help folks that may be on the borderline of the credit line, by giving the land and coming up with using federal subsidies that help pay for closing costs, and building up their equity by putting the land in, allowing people to get that crossover without being penalized. So we're trying things. Don't know that we found the perfect bullet, but we're going to continue to try.
Well, that's what's so great about cities, right? You get to be, if states are sort of the laboratories of democracy, cities are really where the experiments happen. So we're excited to see kind of what comes out of the city. I know we're right up on time, so I can kind of combine my last question real quick. And I'm curious, sort of, what's the vision for Columbia? Where do you see it in 10, 20 years? What do you hope is the end result of all the work that you're doing? And just a quick second part is, any kind of final thoughts on public service and for people out there who are listening and want to get involved?
Well, I think the greatest gift you can give to your community is to get involved. I don't care if it's just the planning commission, the tree commission, or whatever. I think it makes you really respect and appreciate the community you live in, and who's all involved and what they do and why it's so important to take care of our community. Secondly, I'd love to see Columbia to be the number one city. We're the capital of the state, should be the number one city. But for us to be a thriving city, we have to have in-town living. We have to have connectivity. We have to have the jobs and opportunities that people deserve. People don't just want a job, they want a career. They want advancement. And for us to do that, we have to continue to build up our housing stock downtown that attracts restaurants and businesses that grow. And when people see that type of vibrant community, that's when businesses want to come here. But at the same time, we have to show people what we have. And we've been a quiet community for a while, and now we're going to start crowing like a rooster and getting out there telling everybody about Columbia, South Carolina, and what a great community is. And it's the land of opportunity.
So we're putting Charleston on notice. All right.
Hey, I tell people all the time, I'll take 60,000 college students over the ocean any day of the week.
There you go. Well, Mayor, we really appreciate you sharing your insights today. And I know at BPC, we're excited about all the work you're doing and hope we can be helpful in any way. And thank you to everyone watching for joining us today. I hope you'll attend our next webinar, which is on May 19th. And we'll focus on the long-term affordability of LIHTC, low-income housing tax credit financed units. We also have our annual summit on housing supply solutions on June 22nd here in DC. And you can find all our work and more details on those two events at bpcdc.org/housing. Thank you again, Mayor, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you.